Everybody, and welcome to Morale is Very Low, uh, a lightning talk about resource management as a tool for storytelling in narrative games, focusing on more or less three choice of games, choose your own adventures, as examples for this. I'm Gabriel Murray. I'm going to be your host for this 15-minute talk, and let's get started. So before we dive into what we mean by any of this, and I want to give a little background on what got me thinking about this in the first place. I think this thought process for me started in about 2010 when I played my very first choice of game. So this game, if the image doesn't immediately call it to mind for those who haven't played it, is Choice of Broadsides. Choice of Broadsides is one of the first choice of games that was published. It has lead writing by Adam Strong Morse, also written by Dan Fabulich and Heather Albano. And basically it involves following kind of a carbon copy clone world of the Royal Navy, the Napoleonic Wars, where you play an officer, try to survive, rise to the ranks, make admiral, not get mutinied, not get captured, not be court-martialed, and everything else that comes with being a ship of the line captain of its time. And being the person that I am, with the interests that I have, including being a huge Patrick O'Brien, Aubrey Metron nerd, I was really excited when I got the chance to play this game. And the first thing I discovered is that apparently being a Napoleonic era Navy man or woman, gives you that option, is like a lot of pressure. Like a lot of pressure. Even in character, as you can see here, you have stress dreams. I think I've had stress dreams about this game after playing this game and between playthroughs of this game. So let's talk about what resource management is in this context very briefly. So resource management games, here illustrated by a very famous example, this is Oregon Trail 2, are games that are basically simulations that involve managing quantifiable resources with incomplete information. In the case of a game like this, that would be money, among other things. Money is a common resource for this, along with time, health of your party members, food, water. Water is a big deal in this game. And choice of games, I think everyone here is familiar, probably, but our Choose Your Own Adventure IF games involve basically text-based, often involving stat tracking and following one player character through basically their entire career. Not all of them are quite that premise, but it is a common template for these games. All right, so part one of this. HR is not doing its job. So let's go back to Choice of Broadsides for a second. The basic goal of Choice of Broadsides is you want to emulate this guy. This guy is Jack Aubrey. He is a fictional Royal Navy captain who had a lot of success and exploits in the Master and Commander series, here as played in the movie by Russell Crowe. He's capable. He has a good command of his crew. He's personable. He's a great sailor. He's got some personal flaws and areas of incompetence, but they don't really bring him down. So the difference between this man, Jack Aubrey, unfortunately, and me, when I tried to play Jack Aubrey, more or less, or anyone like him in this game, is that Jack Aubrey has decades of training. He grew up in this culture. He, starting from being a midshipman, basically a child officer soldier, he has spent decades in this complex, highly technical world and culture of unspoken social rules, in operating basically the most sophisticated war machine of its day, and getting along with a complex hierarchical society, all of which is completely foreign to me. You or me, the player, have just arrived. This is a game also with a great deal of resource management and leadership called Long Live the Queen, in which the protagonist is actually about as new as you are. But the experience is basically very similar and very overwhelming. You are failing your knowledge of the world and failing what you need to, tests of what you need to know while you're figuring out what it is. So this is a screen cap of the opening screen of Choice of Broadsides. And as you can see here, this is a clearly written, basically in media res, right in the middle of the action. Part of the story, chronicling the middle of a naval battle. It's probably reasonably easy to follow. I say reasonably not because it's not well written, but because this is a highly technical, field of history, and even reading these books can be difficult. But if you can more or less follow it, even if you're wondering, all right, how does this gun work, and so forth. And later you'll be tested exactly how that gun works, which, to be honest, most audiences are just not going to follow the first time around. That's on purpose. So were you supposed to understand that? Were you supposed to understand everything about it? Unfortunately, the answer is yes, depending how you define you. Your character absolutely was. So think about resource management as a form of gameplay that involves incomplete information. Is that this incomplete information, the figuring out the rules of the world while you're playing it, basically turns storytelling in media res, starting in the middle of a battle, much as the movie Mastering Thunder does, into a game mechanic that creates this urgency just in figuring it out. Like this actualizes the experience of the situation you're in and the responsibilities in your own ignorance trying to figure out the new environment. Let me give a specific example from this game, actually, though. So at a certain point, while you're being basically shunted from environment to environment, rank to rank, situation to situation, you end up as the captain of your new command, and your command starts out your ship not very happy and not very disciplined. They do not give you a great first assignment. And there are two stats visibly tracked in front of you, which are crew discipline and crew happiness. If you don't manage them very well, you're going to have a mutiny on your hands. You're probably going to have a mutiny on your hands, at least the first time, maybe even the second time, maybe even the third time. As you try to figure out what manages crew discipline, such as harsh punishment, maintaining a strict hierarchy, and what manages crew happiness, like fairness, one major element of this is that you'll discover they're actually not zero sum. As much as it seems at first like being kind to the crew will make them happier, in fact, many actions decrease both happiness or discipline, and some actions that seem draconian to a modern player actually increase both happiness and discipline because they expect that of you as a commander. So that's the steep ramp onto a game like this, and the benefit it has for the story. So let's talk about another aspect using another game. This is called the Road Trip from Hell. This one, I'm not sure I would call a road trip from hell. This is an image of the land before time, although it was fairly unpleasant for the dinosaurs involved. But we're back to Oregon Trail again, and there's a reason so many of these kinds of narrative games involve travel and involve a journey. Because when you're managing a group of people, like as a leader of a caravan, a band, or anything else, you end up with the rules of the world that you're having to learn being your social world. So here's another example of a choice of game that involves a road trip from hell. This is Saga of the North Wind. This, by the way, is by Tom Knights, and it is a very long, very elaborate, sprawling, and odd game in a great way. But let's just focus on the element that involves like the Land Before Time or Oregon Trail road trip involving a group of people that you are responsible for. So given that the setting changes constantly, the actual world you're getting used to, your milieu, is your group, as a matter of fact. In the sense that every game that involves learning mastery over an environment you're new to, the environment you actually have to learn mastery over in many of these research management games about leadership is your own group, is your social group. So they are your milieu. They're also your only friend, typically, against the hostile external environment that shifts during this time. They're your potential allies, and the better you take care of them, and the better they like you, the better you're going to do against the random events or not so random events that life throws your way. They're also your main adversary. So that's the thing about the milieu, is that these are PvE games, more or less, abstractly speaking. And your environment is the group you're in, which means that the worst dangers you're going to face involve losing the approval and gaining the animosity of the group you're with. So the social world that you have to learn the rules of is your milieu and is your enemy, essentially. I think that in a way this does actually mirror, I mean this semi-jokingly, but not entirely, the fact that leading a group or interacting with a group does feel like a confusing, largely unknowable PvE experience. It doesn't have the rapport or ability of individual sincerity of one-on-one experiences. You've used one-on-one experiences as a stand-in for a stand-in or like a test for group morale and so forth. But anyone who's ever even led a group project bigger than 3 people knows that this often feels like you are interacting with a new world, a new set of rules that you don't understand very well, and that pretty soon people are judging you on it immediately. I will say that there is a particular advantage that IF has, however, compared to you, the person, which is that in real life, it's much easier to get along with 1 people usually, or 2 people, than it is to try and manage 20 or 80 or 800 people. The reverse is true, I would argue, in terms of what IF is good at simulating. Because the interactions between 2 people are so sophisticated, interactive, and complicated, like there's often a sense that dialogue options and interaction options are very limited in any video game or IF setting. But IF is uniquely suited to simulating the reactions and relationship with a group, with the feeling of trying to keep morale up, with pleasing a group, with leading a group. So why, given this is something that most of us drastically avoid in real life, and with some exceptions, group projects, team leadership, management, why is it so fun? I mean, the thing is, it's kind of the same reason. So here's a picture of my ideal ship of the line. This graphic represents the discipline and happiness and general crew attitude I'm looking for every time I play a game like Choice of Broadsides, or in fact, any other game of this type. I go in and I think about it, and each of my subsequent lives, I try to replicate this. This is actually what happens almost every time. I mean this literally in Choice of Broadsides because the mutiny is actually very hard to avoid, typically, as an officer. But on some level, I felt that every single resource management game I've played has involved a level of disappointing people, of letting people down, of feeling like a weak leader, of feeling like they had high hopes in me, and they weren't impressed. The fact is, I want imaginary people to like me, and we all want imaginary people to like us to some extent, because we want real people to like us to some extent. And the idea in playing a game is we can't entirely tell the difference, at least not emotionally. I want to bring up another game example here that's pretty intense and entirely engages more mechanized and more granular resource management than the other ones I've mentioned so far. This is a game called Choice of Rebels Uprising that involves leading a revolution and specifically getting a revolutionary force and the people it's taking care of through a long winter. Not the sexy battles, not the Bastille, not even the guillotine. You're not there yet. You just need to stay alive and try to keep your people alive and try not to alienate the peasantry or compromise your own principles or hurt people. That's not easy. So a central element of this winter, which allows you to play in both more and less granular formats, is the number of meals you have, which basically govern how much you're going to get on your raids and how much food you have. To a certain extent, you end up in this intense, dark, almost grim, dark setting and story where the love of your people and their belief in you as a messianic revolutionary savior depends on the number of mules you have. The mules end up being a thing you are haggling over and trying to maximize your use of as kind of a stand-in for, or at least a lever on the main relationship you have with your people, which is their provider. It's a hard winter. It's a long winter. It's a much harder winter than these people are having here. You're not this well equipped. But the thing about this brutal experience, and I have to say in Choice of Rebels especially, it is deliciously brutal, is that very often you feel like a letdown. You feel like a bad leader on your first time through, because you just don't understand the people and setting fast enough. You have to think on the fly. But you can replay, and even if you don't replay, you can gather knowledge after the fact from your own failures. Because in a game like this, you may understand people fast enough, you can still understand them. That's not true of real life in the same way, certainly not groups. There's a certain epistemological uncertainty that comes from interacting with groups as a leader and just interacting with groups in general, as anyone who's ever tried to run a social media presence could tell you, that is a form of trial and error that may perhaps forever stay at the trial stage. The knowability of mechanics, the mastery that's possible in a resource management game, no matter how lost and foreign it is to begin with, is the promise, is the fantasy of this kind of game. It's why the failure is fun. It's why the success is even more fun. And it's what keeps it coming back, is trying to interact with a complex world that is just simple enough and predictable enough, and most importantly, repeatable enough that we can actually learn it. I think that's especially valuable as a storytelling mechanic when trying to replicate the feeling of leading a group and wanting people to believe in you, wanting people to trust you, and wanting to not let people down, whether it's on one of these, or this, or in one of these, or back to Long Live the Queen and the young ruler of a new kingdom. The same principle basically applies. We want people to like us. We really don't want people to reject us. And that makes research management games about leadership deliciously effective and brutally. Here are my references, and here's my promised cat. Thank you, everyone.